You're listening to the Building and Branding Podcast, brought to you by Virtual Vision. I'm your host, Amanda Stichter. On this show, I sit down with experts in the restoration and home services industry to hear their stories of how they built their businesses to succeed and stand out. Our conversations will uncover the challenges they've faced, the strategies they've employed, and the pivotal moments that defined their paths. We'll also dive into the critical importance of branding and marketing in this field, sharing insights on how to create a compelling brand that resonates with customers and stands out in a competitive market. Join us as we blend practical advice with inspiring real-life stories, providing you the tools and motivation to craft precision and build a lasting brand. Welcome to Building and Branding. Let's get started. In this episode of Building and Branding,
we had no aspirations to get to the size that we are. I think through good luck, or opportunities and hard work and hiring the right people, we've just been blessed beyond belief to continue to grow and adapt in an industry that's changing quickly. If you want to grow, you have to hire people that are smarter, brighter, and talented than you. And that goes into every aspect of the job. 80% of us don't want to hire people that are quote unquote overqualified because they're maybe afraid that they're going to show them up or take their job. As a manager, your job is to promote people, support them. Maybe one day, if you're a really good leader, maybe one day one of your employees is going to be your boss. And that's what being a good manager is. The industry's been really good to me and my family, my dad and our company. And it's my role, I think, to give back to the community that we call restoration.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Building and Branding Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Stichter. I'm really excited for today's episode to be joined by someone who is really, truly a legend in the restoration industry at large, a familiar face to a lot of people, the one and only Jeff Moore. Thanks for joining today, Jeff.
Thanks for having me, Amanda.
Would you just start by telling, I don't want to assume that everyone knows who you are or your background and kind of all the different things you're involved in. But would you just start by giving us a quick introduction, what you do in the industry, and then we'll kind of just go from there.
Yeah, so I'll kind of start with the business that I'm involved in. So my dad back in 1989 started what is today the largest family-owned and operated restoration company, and I think not only the U.S., but I think in the world. And so we started off as a little small environmental abatement business and didn't do any restoration, didn't do construction, and we've just had a staircase amount of growth year after year, decade after decade. Me and both of my brothers now work family business. Dad's chairman of the board, so certainly not in the day-to-day business as he once was. But both my brothers and I basically grew up in the business. It's effectively the only job I've ever had at ATI. So whether it was sucking carpets and sucking water on emergency service jobs, being an abatement supervisor, working in as a project manager, working in the field, and then obviously all the way up into management. I've got the two younger brothers and myself. My current role is my title is President and Chief Acquisition Officer, but I spend most of my time, I would say, industry facing and leading our charge and figuring out how we continue to grow. So this family business grew organically for really until 2020, really since COVID. And so we had 23 locations. So we now have 70 locations through acquisition. So I spent a lot of my time talking to other owners in restoration, the locals, the regionals, the nationals, and then where I really have a passion is just for the industry at large. And so both my role at ATI affords me the opportunity to speak to what most would consider your direct competitors on a regular basis. I actually talk to more competitors than I do employees in my own company. That's kind of my crew now. And so I kind of have a general knowledge of what's going on in the industry, both in local markets where we operate, even in markets that we don't operate because of some of the relationships I have. And I'm currently president-elect of RAA. All that means is I'll be taking over for Ben Looper next year at convention. And so I'm on my second run at being a board member of RAA. I'm currently on my fourth year being in the board. And so I spent a lot of time with vendors and talking to some of the larger restoration owners. And then honestly, I give a ton of advice to other small restorers that call me. I bet you I do 3 or 4 random calls a week from people that are getting into it, have been into it, need advice. And so I spend a lot of time just helping and educating. And I feel like it's my duty. The industry's been really good to me and my family, my dad and our company. And it's my role, I think, to give back to the community that we call restoration.
I love that concept of, everything that it's poured into you and understanding the goal then of giving back. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So one of the big things that we talk about a lot on this podcast that I'm kind of a big proponent is, first of all, is understanding the story of how people got to where they are today. And you touched on some of that. I'm curious, would you ever have thought when you started with ATI as a family business, how many years ago was that now?
Well, we started in 89. I worked full time in 2001. So yeah, a couple decades
Okay.
now.
Yeah. Would you ever have imagined that it would be where it is today? Like, was that a natural goal or vision of the company, or did it just naturally happen, organically happen that way?
I think just like any large business, most people don't have, everyone has aspirations to do more, but no, I mean, I asked my dad recently, I don't know if it was in the last year or so, if he had, what his big concept was at ATI and how big. And he's like, Jeff, I just, even the naming of the company, there was no reasoning on why he named the company the way he did. And he's like, I just wanted to provide for my family. That's all it was. I wanted to be at
Mm.
home more than I was before.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be a provider. I didn't want your mom to have to work. And I wanted flexibility at home. And no, he had no aspirations. Honestly, so 2001, when I graduated college, we're probably doing in the 20 million range. Still,
Wow.
what today I'd say is a pretty large regional company, but only operating in California. And even when I started, we didn't have aspirations. We never talked about hitting 100 million. I think once we get to like 50 million, you got to have a goal. And then at some point we said, all
Mhm.
right, well, dad's like, we're going to have a big celebration. And like, that's going to be it. If I get to $100 million, I'm done. And then, by the time he really exited the business, at least in a full-time capacity, now we talk about the B word, which is a billion, which we've been talking about for 5 years. But no, we had no aspirations to get to the size that we are. I think through good luck and opportunities and hard work and hiring the right people, we've just been blessed beyond belief to continue to grow and adapt in an industry that's changing quickly. But no, there was no master plan to make us into the largest family operated restoration business. We just had our nose down to the ground, and just like everyone else out there, whether you're in restoration or outside, you're just trying to get the bills paid this month and trying to do more revenue than you did last month, last quarter, and last year. And very day-to-day focus, I would say, for the first probably 30 years, to be honest with you, Amanda.
Mm. It's interesting to just hear that story from a perspective of I'm also a restoration kid. I grew up in the business and watched my dad, aim for those very same things. Very interesting. Did your dad have a history in restoration prior to starting ATI? How did he get into that?
Yeah, so very very similar to our story. Dad grew up in a family restoration business. So he grew up in a town called
Okay.
Fort Worth, which is in basically the suburbs of Dallas, and he worked for a company that we all know today as BMS, or
Oh,
Blackman Mooring,
interesting.
or BMS Cat. And so he went
Yeah.
to high school with the second generation of both the Blackmans and the Moorings. And I've got a photo of my dad in like a Sears catalog in a BMS uniform when he was like 17 or 18 years old, in a print advertisement for the company. And yeah, no, he worked his high school, college years. Then I think a decade after college, I think he worked for BMS. And then eventually, a couple of the managers there asked him to leave, and they started another business, relocated to California, and did that. So I think what he learned along the way, and then after that, he had a really bad experience having partners, people that he worked with that are now all of a sudden financial partners with him. And,
Yeah.
they all thought they were friends until something goes south. And then, so I think the catalyst of ATI was, I want to do day-to-day business. I don't want to have to jump on a plane every week, every month. And I don't want to have to hire and fire the same employee in a given year because it's busy or slow. And so the premise of ATI was do work locally, and do day-to-day business. Big losses are great, but that doesn't keep the lights on because he had too many experiences at both of his prior jobs where they were chasing really big work, and literally
Sure.
examples of hiring and firing the same person like 2 or 3 times in a single calendar year. And that's not what he
Wow.
wanted for his life moving forward. And he didn't want partners. So he got really burned in that. The second deal that he had was what he thought were some of his best friends.
Hmm. Interesting. Was was there ever a moment, growing up in that, was there ever a moment in your mind where you thought, I don't know if I'm going to continue in this like family, you know, staying in restoration, staying in that? Did you venture into anything else? Or was it in your mind always just, no, this is what I've watched my family do. It's provided for my family. I'm going to stick with this as well.
Honestly, I never gave it any thought. I grew up thinking I never gave it any other. I think both of my brothers at one point both had aspirations to do, at least for a hot second, because most of them
Sure.
were in the business pretty quickly, post college, if not immediately. Honestly, I never gave it any thought. Working at 14, 15, 16, 17, Christmas break, summer, I really enjoyed, and dad never had me do the same thing. So if I did a summer in accounting, he had me in 3 or 4 different roles. The next summer I was working in the field as a carpenter. Then I was working in the restoration department. So I got a glimpse of everything, and he gave me goals coming out of college of what I needed to do to move into management and different things. He had me move to San Francisco, which I wasn't a fan of at the time, because he didn't want me to work underneath the shadows. And so for each job I took, each goal he gave me, I was able to surpass and do something different. So honestly, every project in college, I was a business degree major, and every time, whether it was an HR class, a finance class, you always needed real life case studies. I always used ATI as an example, and I really enjoyed
Sure.
everything I learned about the business. And so, no, and I hope my kids are very different than me. I actually want my kids. We've actually got it written in our bylaws in the company that you can't come work for us after college for 2 years, because we want you to have life experience. We want you to know what it's like to have a boss that's not related to your family, or where you've got ownership that's the same. And so we want them to have a different experience for us. So we're fortunate that way. And I tell my kids, I said, go do what you love. You've always got a family business you can fall back on, but that should never be your plan. Figure out what it is that really gives you purpose in life and go explore that. And if you come back, great. If you don't, that's totally fine as well.
I think that's a really powerful thing too, especially as a parent, working in this business and then raising kids in this business, to be able to say, it's okay if you don't want to do this. It was our kind of the opposite, but when I was in high school, part of my dad's company was also just doing like some janitorial work for larger businesses. So it was our family rule that you had to work in the family business for at least a year before you went and got another job. Now, I was in high school, but I cleaned a business at night. And to be totally frank, I despised every second of it. Doing janitorial work was just like, I was like, I don't want to do this. Maybe if I had been, in other parts of it, and it's fine. But I appreciated the fact that like that was there to kind of train my work ethic. Again, I was in high school, so I was a pretty young kid. But I think that's really cool that you wrote that in to allow your kids the chance to say, those years really are formative to when you're finding out what you are passionate about and what kind of fuels you as you move into adulthood. So I think that that's a really cool thing that I haven't heard before, but very, very wise.
Yeah, and we'll allow them to work in the business like in high school and college, obviously, if they need an internship or something. But once you graduate full time, you really do need to go explore. But it's kind of fun. I've got 4 kids. My oldest is 17, and just actually brought him to Contractor Connection this year. And he sat in with some meetings. He got to sit at the trade show booth. We got to talk to vendors. He actually met some owners that were interested in selling their business, some of which I knew actually pretty well. And so with my son there, I asked him, I said, so how long have we known each other, and why haven't you sold your business to ATI yet? And why would you want to sell it? And if you had to sell it today, who would you sell it to and why? And it was just good experiences. My son's applying to college and figuring out what he wants to do. And I'm not trying to drive him to the business. I'm really just trying to educate him on what he should study in college and what excites him and what bores him as well. Because there's plenty of what we
Absolutely.
did that was really boring, and some of what we did was to him exciting. And so I think
Sure.
you want your kids to be happy. At the end of the day, I could care less if they ever work in the business. I think that's what all parents want for their children.
Absolutely. So switching gears a little bit, I have a question for you. So I think when you look at, obviously you're a very large family owned business, and I like to say about our industry, it's a very small industry realistically in comparison, right? A lot of people don't know what the restoration industry is until they hit that like moment of needing restoration services. It's a small industry with a very big impact. And I think the impact that ATI has is even like tenfold. You look at the fact that you are a family owned business, but you're a very large company. I want to pick your brain a little bit about the fact that realistically at its core, all restoration companies provide the same services, right? We're sucking
Yeah.
water, we're doing all these things. How do you, when you acquire businesses outside of the ATI name, how do you think owners can best set their businesses apart outside of their services that they're offering, beyond those like commoditized pieces of this business?
I think there's a few ways to do it, but at the end of the day, you're right. We all do the same thing. So differentiating yourself is really important. I think from the consumer perspective, the best way to differentiate, and again, if you're a consumer who's had a flood and has ever had a flood before, whether they use ATI or any other company, they're not going to know the difference. But
Right.
I think on the commercial side, for someone who has properties across the country and can use and test out other brands, the only way to differentiate yourself is how you communicate. How do you treat your people? At the end of the day, you're only as good as a person show up on the job.
Mm.
Are you communicating with them? Are you telling them? Are you doing it for what you're saying you're going to do it for? Are you providing them timely updates? And how fast are you getting them back into business or back into their home? I think at the forefront, that is the most important part. And the difference in having a good culture and a bad culture, or someone who likes a brand and that person being happy and communicative, is really important. We really are we're not firemen. We are, I always say, we're kind of the best of both worlds. We're not the ones in danger, but we're actually the ones that are out there to communicate with you. The fire department's really out there to put something, they're not there to communicate with you. They're not there
Right.
to tell you, play by play of what's going on. They're trying to make the building and people safe. Our job is to really communicate. Quite honestly, we communicate with the consumer probably more, well, actually not more, exponentially more than even the insurance company. And
Mhm.
quite honestly, I would say more times than not, people actually get us confused. And sometimes they even get us confused as the insurance company or the insurance adjuster, even though we don't represent
Right.
ourselves to be that. But we sometimes are the only person outside of getting a piece of mail or a claim check. They really do look at us. And so it's really how you communicate with people. Do you have empathy with what they're going through? Have you had a loss yourself? Have you actually been out there at midnight and understand what it's like for someone whose house is burned down and doesn't have anything and lost everything? And the difference in just boarding up the house and, hey, can I go, do you even have did the wallet burn down? Do you literally have nothing? Can I go to Walgreens and buy you some products? So at the end of the day, insurance company's going to reimburse us. Can I put you up in a hotel tonight? I mean, all those little things that we can do as restorers really do impact the consumer. And I think the other way to differentiate yourself from your competitor is, who are you doing business for and how are you getting your business? And I think that's more from a strategy perspective, but I would
Yeah.
say there's half the industry that certainly works with insurance companies. And I think this is true for lawyers, anyone doing insurance, even medical and auto. Are you working with the insurance company, or are you adversarial to the insurance company? Are you trying to get the claim before the carrier, to where the carrier is not going to want to work with you, and the strategy and how you get your business? And do you want to do residential or commercial? And so I think those are ways to differentiate yourself. If you're doing it direct, you're doing it through the insurance company, it's just a different strategy. If you're getting it direct, making sure you have good reviews and people are having great experiences with you. So I think there's other ways from a strategic perspective, but I think the end of the day, doing the work, it really comes down to people and communication. And I would say process is probably the third one, but I think the people and communication make such a world of it. Even within our company, we don't all do everything the same. We never will always. We are not McDonald's. As much as we are striving to be more like that, I don't think we'll ever get there. So one project director from another in one office to another, even in the same office, the service can be exponentially different.
Absolutely. Do you find as you kind of move people into, when you talk about like project managers and all those pieces, going back to that concept of empathy and communication, I hear a lot in our industry at large of training on the technical aspects, training on the certifications. But I think it can sometimes be missed that really is a big piece of our job. And do you internally at ATI train your team on the concept of empathy and communication with that homeowner? Because I think oftentimes what we find when we approach these homeowners in these situations is for them, this is like the worst day, one of the worst days of their lives. They're in chaos. They don't know what to do next. Much like you said, they might have lost their wallet. They don't have food. They don't have beds. How do you coach someone when they're first starting and how to respond well to that situation?
Oh, I think training to that is really important. So we've got ATI University and a full training department that's training to the technical and the soft skills. But I think the soft skills are probably more important. And I think no matter what we're doing, I think we can always be doing more, Amanda, when it comes to training on the soft skills and the empathy. And because that comes down to whether it's the person answering the phones in your company, it's the technician or supervisor showing up, it's the project manager, it's the estimator. All of us have to have those empathy skills, and that truly can be the difference in the person who had a fire wanting to sign up with your restoration company to not only do the mitigation, which typically is pretty easy to sign, especially if you've received the call, unless you're chasing a fire. Getting the repairs should be a slam dunk, as long as you communicate it correctly, as long as the insurance company isn't going to talk poorly about you or someone else, and as long as you do the job that you say you're going to, getting the repairs should be a really easy job, but making sure everyone's communicating from that first inbound call all the way to the estimator to making the job walk with the adjuster. And the more that you miss those opportunities, you're going to find that you're going to lose those construction opportunities if you're full service to other restorers. Adjuster's going to make a referral. Every adjuster has a friend. Every adjuster wants to bring in someone they've had a good experience with, but no adjuster in their right mind is going to make a referral when the homeowner's had an incredible experience and is just jumping for joy about how incredible you are. It doesn't matter if you're on the program or not on the program. No one's looking to rock the boat. The adjuster wants less phone calls, and he knows if he's making a referral to a non-program or a program person when they're really happy, they're most likely not going to make that recommendation.
I think it's really powerful in what you said too, of looking at the full spectrum of those soft skill trainings, because it's easy to imagine the power of empathy and communication when you're, the project manager one-on-one with the customer. But it is so important, even just with that first phone call. In fact, my very first podcast episode ever talked about the concept of that first phone call can realistically make or break your opportunity to work with that customer down the road. And even that skill set right there can be the momentum that will win you a customer for life and really set the rest of your team up for success. So I love that you brought that in, because it is important to understand that at every point in the process, that communication and empathy is needed in that process. Hey listeners, we've got some exciting news for you from one of our sponsors. If you're in the restoration industry and looking to gain a strategic edge, you won't want to miss the upcoming Rebuild Conference, brought to you by Business Mentors. This isn't just another industry event. Rebuild is the Restoration Technology Conference. It's designed to bridge the gap in the tech revolution facing our industry. providing focused education and an interactive all-in-one trade show. You'll have the opportunity to connect with top technology players and explore the best solutions for your business. Here's what you can look forward to. All the best tech and digital companies and platforms in the industry, all in one place. Keynote speakers and sessions that are dedicated to benefiting your business. A partnership with Know-How ensures clear and actionable takeaways from every keynote and workshop session. An interactive trade show floor where you can get hands-on with the latest technology. This is the first event of its kind in our industry, changing the way we approach trade shows and technology and restoration. Register now through August 15th to save $300 on your registration. So don't wait. Secure your spot today and take the first step towards transforming your business. For more information and to register, visit rebuildconference.io. That's rebuildconference.io, October 28th through the 30th in San Antonio, Texas. See you there.
One thing I found interesting, as we've acquired 18 companies now, one of them that we acquired in Virginia called Jenkins Enterprises, they did something really interesting, and we're still looking at it. We learn from every company that we bring into our family. But one thing I've never seen that they did is they had a former pastor who was working in the business, and his sole job was to communicate and provide empathy to the homeowner. So he was a pastor for 10 or 15 years. And then was in a bind. And then this restorer, Jeremy Jenkins, offered him a job, and his job was to go out to every job. He didn't have any technical skills. He didn't know how to estimate. He didn't know Xactimate. And their conversion rate was like nothing we've ever seen. Like ATI would be twice the size that we are if we could convert the number of jobs that they were able to. But he was going out at 11 o'clock at night if they got it board up, but he wasn't out there doing the work, and his job was simply to communicate with the customer, explain the process, walk him through and provide empathy. And his job was typically to sign the entire job, the construction job. And so I think us as restorers, even ATI and most of the industry, we're more focused on the technical side of it. Like, I've got to get the estimate, I've got to get it uploaded. At the end of the day, the customer is going to be made whole, whether the estimate's done today, tomorrow, or next week. They just want to know what's going on. When am I going to be done? When am I going to be back in my house? And they could care less about you taking your tape measure, digital measure, or your Matterport in their family room. That's not providing them any empathy or comfort whatsoever.
Absolutely. Wow, that's really powerful. And have you seen any other companies do something similar to that?
Never.
Interesting. I mean, when you explain it, it's sort of like, well, yeah, that's a no-brainer. That's a pastor does a lot of counseling. They understand what it looks like to need to navigate those tricky roads with people. But bringing that into a really tactical manner, I haven't heard that before. It's fascinating.
Yes.
So I know we're kind of running out of time, but I want to ask you, just a couple of final questions. As you kind of look over your journey of starting so many years ago, a couple decades ago, and watching your dad even longer, are there any stories that really stand out that you think really exemplify the power of empathy in the restoration industry, or just the restoration industry as a whole, like something that just always sticks with you?
From like an employee perspective, a customer perspective, does it matter?
Doesn't matter. Any of the above.
I can give you tons of examples. Let's see. I think employees. So at the end of it, we talked about, what makes you different from your competitor. I think building a good culture and being a good steward of your employees is really important. When they're watching, more importantly, when they're not watching. So I think it's the little things that us as employers can do for our employees, whether it's starting up a GoFundMe page, whether it's someone who's battling cancer and you need to help them out with treatments, whether it's financially, whether it's, giving them a whole bucket full of vacation. So they're not hurt financially. I think the more you can do that, I've got so many stories, not only in ATI, even some of my biggest competitors. I've got one person in mind, I won't say the name, but one of the largest restoration companies, I've tried recruiting this person forever. And, they dealt with some personal things at home medically, and the company really stepped up and took care of them. And I think it's such a tough environment. Employment is so low. So I think I tell everyone I know, like, keep the employees you have, especially the good ones, and be there for them. And it's not all about you. You don't need to have the glory. You don't always have to feel like you're the good, great employer. Not everyone needs to know about it. Honestly, the best things that you can do as an employer or an owner, as a person, are the things that no one else knows about. And it's something between you and the employee, and being there for someone that got hurt. The difference in the owner showing up in the hospital and being there with their children and their spouse and helping them out. I think that really provides a ton of strength and opportunity, but also you're going to have an employee for life, and it's up for the employee to share that if they want to share that. And I think those are really powerful things that we can do. And I think, trying to think of an example with the customer that comes to mind. I mean, we've got countless examples of where we've helped people out where they were, underinsured. There's, I think one of my favorite stories, we've got ATI Cares, which is kind of how we provide awards and accolades to each other. I remember one time, and so anytime someone does something good, you can give them, we call them bonusly points, but it's effectively points towards almost like a credit card program. So the more points you get, you can redeem it for Amazon or gift cards. And I remember one time someone was on the side of the road. I think it was in Phoenix, and it was one of our biggest competitors in Phoenix. Blew a tire, was on the side of the freeway. And again, it's those things you do when no one's watching. And, some people are going to see their competitor and say something poorly, just like we do in our political arena about each other. And instead of doing that, they pulled over, they helped them, they changed their tire, they got him to the gas station, gave them a ride. Obviously, we're late to their appointment. And so I think it's all those little things. We have to be good stewards in our community. At the end of the day, we are in I would say it's a big industry, but compared to most industries, it is definitely a niche industry, because as you said earlier, man, most people don't know what a restoration company is. We still debate internally, even the name of our company, like ATI Restoration. We've got a great brand and a name in our industry for those that are in it. But if we ever wanted to get work directly from the consumer, so when someone has a flood, ATI is not top of someone's mind. We are not advertising. We're not on the television. Unless you know someone that knows someone, you've got just as good a luck finding most likely one of the large franchise systems that does a good job. But some people think of furniture restoration or car restoration, or they don't even think of even as restoration as defined, even by, like, in my role as a RAA, like, most people outside of the industry don't even know what restoration is. Because I think if you ask 10 people on the street, I don't even know if one or two of them would identify. If I asked them the first word they came to mind with restoration, I would suspect very few would actually think of our industry. I think most would think of something else.
I would agree with that, actually. When I started this podcast and first posted, I shared on our on Virtual Vision's Facebook page, and then I had shared on my personal page, and I had several people, including family members, who, again, have watched my dad run a restoration business, say, what is the restoration industry? And again, I mean, it's that concept of, you don't really know what it is until you need it, until you're in that situation. If someone had asked me years ago, what does restoration mean to you? I probably would have said art restoration. I don't know, bringing art back to life. I just, right. So interesting that you should say that, because I think that is very, very true. And realistically, at the core of everything that this industry at large does, it's so focused on helping the consumer, helping someone that's in that moment. And even that example that you gave of pulling alongside your competitor, yes, you're competing against businesses, but at the core of it, we're all humans. There's a humanity to your competitor as well. You're in this together. There's enough damaged jobs to go around, that we can support each other in that process. And I think, I know that that's a very big part of the RIA, and advocating to support all the different members and companies that are a part of this community, really. And that's what it is. It's a community of restorers. And I love that.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if you look as a restorer, just speaking for ATI in general, but obviously talking to a lot of companies, there's not a lot of competition. If my neighbor has a flood, the most people you could see out there might be two. She may have, maybe she called someone, maybe she looked up, maybe she got an old Yellow Pages, maybe she went to Google, maybe she got a referral from an agent. Because again, just like your family didn't know what you do, I got family members that doesn't know what I do. I got neighbors that still don't understand what I do, that have lived next to me for many years. I remember a scenario where a competitor was my prior house. I was kind of a caretaker. There was a lady that lived next door by herself. She was 90 years old, and she had a leak, and she called a restoration company. I had no idea what I did. I go over there twice a week. She's got no family that lives in the state. She considers us her family. And I see a restoration contractor who I wasn't a fan of, and I knew had a history of taking advantage of customers. I go over there, explain who I am. Within 10 minutes, they're off site. But this is someone that sees me all the time. They don't understand. And the reality is, except for those, or like a big fire or people are maybe chasing, your typical, even $100,000 water loss, commercial, residential, we're not competing against anyone. We may be competing for that agent. Are they going to refer A or B or C? But sometimes we don't even know we're in competition. We're typically the only ones on site. So there are so many jobs out there. There really isn't a lot of competition. The competition is how you get that referrals. Are you paying online? Are you working the relationship with the agent or the adjuster? That's where we maybe compete. But on the job level, there's just really not much competition. I think there used to be back in the day, but I think as we get further and further, I had a breakfast yesterday. I'm in Oakland right now on a work trip, and it was funny. We were reminiscing about how different it was. This was my first boss at ATI, and how it used to be all relationship driven. And him and I historically we called ourselves the bagel pushers, and we would drop off cookies and bagels, and and he was saying, and now he works for his kids actually started a restoration company. And I said, it's funny, Jeff, we still do the same thing that you and I did 20 years ago, and that's how we're crushing it. And it's a business that wasn't around 6 years ago, and they're doing $15 million a year now, but they've got that old school mentality of people like to do business with people they know and see. And he even complained. He's like, it's hard, Jeff. He's like, you and I used to drop off like cookies and chocolates and Starbucks. And he's like, it's so hard now because everyone works from home, or they don't want to see people, the relationship. And it's just different. People don't want to go out with vendors. People don't want to know service providers. But those that are willing to do so, that is what's differentiating us from the competition, because no one else is doing it anymore.
Absolutely. People like to work with people. That's
absolutely
true. Absolutely true. Well, Jeff, before we end, my final question for you is, as someone who's been in this industry for a long time, I am sure, and obviously can tell from our conversation today, that there are so many just nuggets of wisdom that you can pull from your experience and offer to others. If you had to choose, someone walked up to you and said, what wisdom would you give me as someone who's newer in this industry, or maybe has just been in it for a short period of time and is looking to understand how they can grow and really build the brand of their business, or their brand of who they are and the culture into this industry? What nugget of wisdom would you tell them?
So there's three I would talk about. The first is people. And I'll tell you, ATI still struggles with this today. If you want to grow, you have to hire people that are smarter, brighter, and talented than you. And that goes into every aspect of the job. And so as a manager, and I'm a manager now, even at ATI or RIA, you have to have people in roles below you that you think, if you've got three people and I'm running a restoration company and I've got three managers, I want to know that I've got three capable people if I were to get hit by a truck that can take over my business tomorrow. And if you've got the mentality to where well, I don't want to hire someone, or maybe he's too smart, or I hate it when someone says, well, I didn't hire that person, Jeff, because they're overqualified. I'm like, it's not your job to decide if someone's overqualified. If they're overqualified, that means they've got talent to do your job. And I would say 80% of us don't want to hire people that are quote unquote overqualified because they're maybe afraid that they're going to show them up or take their job. But as a manager, your job is to promote people, support them, educate them. And hopefully, if you're really a good leader, you will continue to rise. And if you've hit your threshold, whatever that is of growth, hopefully people above you will maybe one day, if you're a really good leader, maybe one day one of your employees is going to be your boss. And I think that's how you need to look at everything. And that's what being a good manager is. I'd say the second thing for like a nugget, I push this with everyone I talk to. So at the end of the day, you growing up in restoration, we live and die on Xactimate. It's not that there aren't other platforms out there, but there's a reason why they have the percentage of market share that they do, and whether you're on the insurance side or the contractor side. But speaking for the contractor side, so you can grow your business two ways. And I think most entrepreneurs focus on the first one, which is on the top line. At the end of the day, as someone who buys businesses, the bottom line is so much more important than the top line, because I can give you countless examples, Amanda, where we literally grew from $80 million to $100 million as a company. But guess what? We didn't make a single dollar more at $100 million that we did at $80 million, because we spent money, we overhired, we lowered our gross profit margin, we took jobs that we historically wouldn't. We were chasing revenue, but we weren't actually growing on the bottom line. So I think it's really important as an entrepreneur. I've got countless examples where I bought a business doing $15 million a year, and I paid one, let's say $100, and I paid the other one $150. So you've got businesses that are worth 50% more because they're focusing on the bottom line. And so going back to the Xactimate, there's a product by Verisk. There's a product by Actionable Insights. The Actionable Insights refers to it as the actionable profile. It's effectively anyone who use AI. The way I explain it is AI or Grammarly. So if you're an Xactimate user and say you've got a flood and you're putting in 4 fans into DHU and water extraction, on the right side of the Xactimate screen, if you do these plugins, and they don't cost a lot of money, in real time, it's going to tell me that I ought to be doing decontamination of the equipment. I ought to be doing HEPA vacuuming. I should consider setting up the equipment, which is a line item. And maybe I think it's defaulted to like either half an hour per piece of equipment or 0.75. Those are all things that we do as restorers, detaching and resetting contents. Unless you're in a bathroom, there's typically almost always something that needs to be moved, and you should be charging for that. And so this technology lives in there, and it works for mitigation, contents, environmental, construction. And I can tell you as a restorer, ATI, we've seen as much as a 5% revenue lift in using this technology. And there's not a lot of things out there that a 5% lift is huge, especially on the bottom line. If you can increase your margin or your top line revenue by 5 points, as a company of our size, if we can move a needle by 1%, like we are jumping up for joy. That is our goal every year. So I think that's a big nugget. If you haven't looked at it, you can buy it directly from Verisk. Actionable, I would say, is a little bit more robust, and the rules are going to be just slightly more aggressive than what you'll get from a Verisk, who's clearly got 2 customers, half of them being carriers, half of them being, small and large restoration companies. And then I think the third piece is RAA. I think it's getting these tidbits, whether it's listening to your podcast, going to a conference. I think you need to network with your peers. And I think RA is a great platform. I think if you're a local restorer that doesn't go to national shows, you don't have to. I would highly encourage you to join RA for the benefits that we have and the savings that are going to drive your bottom line. But at the end of the day, you want to know your peers, and whether they're direct peers, they're peers in other markets, you want to get best practices. And as an owner of a restoration company, it's really hard. You're not socializing with your estimators all the time on what you can or should be doing strategically. Maybe you are to a certain extent, but being able to have a relationship, and it could be something very informal where there's 4 or 5 people in their market. Again, don't violate antitrust. Don't talk about pricing, but best practices. Again, unless you're competing, again, if you're both chasing fires, I wouldn't recommend it. But as long as you're all doing business a little bit differently, I think RA is a great platform to do that. I think there's companies that do that for a living. I think you can do that organically, but Don't look at your competition as competition. Look at them as your peers. And I can learn from, if I'm a $10 million person in Phoenix, there's got to be 4 or 5 other $10 million people. Maybe there's some smaller ones and some bigger ones that I want to have relationships with, whether it's in a group setting, maybe it's having lunch once a quarter, once a year. But I think it's good to have someone outside that you can talk to. Even groups like Vistage or YPO, where you can run business things by them, I think are really helpful as an owner. And you tend to get in this silo where you think like, oh my God, I can't talk to anyone. All I've got is my spouse. And as I'm going to bed, I can vent and grief, but they may or may not be in the industry. And, depending on their education background and profession, they may or may not be super helpful. So I do think it's really important for you to have someone in industry that you can look at as a mentor, a guide, a group, an association like RIA. I think those are really important, especially if you're looking to scale and grow and improve, which you quite honestly have to. Being a second generation owner, how we did business 20 years ago ain't how we're doing it now. And it's certainly how we're doing it today is going to be different in 20 years from now. And whether it's driving by technology or how you're getting those relationships, it is constantly changing. TPA didn't exist when my dad started the business. Now it's a big part of it. 20 years from now, it may not exist. I have no idea, but you have to always be adapting and changing in order to be relevant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will agree with you on your last point, especially of the RIA. I won't get into it all now, but growing up in the restoration industry, this was probably the thing that I said I would like subconsciously never get into in my life. And yet here I am, and my first introduction back to this industry after leaving it, after college, and my dad eventually sold his company. My first introduction back was the RIA annual convention, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now. And it changed my perspective on the industry that I kind of had held on to, because I watched all of these companies come together and support each other and be there for each other, to not feel alone, because it can feel lonely. Just like you said, you have those people, but unless they're in the industry and really understand kind of the depth to which you need to talk things through sometimes. But having those other people that I watched happen at the RAA, and now having met my people, that I go to for advice and talk to, that I met at RIA 4 or 5 years ago, that's been incredible and truly like a catalyst for growth moving forward.
Yeah. And on that, I do have to do an RA quick plug. It's, if you're not a member, it's $299 to join for a first time member. Come meet people, come meet the vendors. If you use Xactimate, which I think everyone does, you get savings by joining RIA. You get savings with, I think there's 20 companies, yours included, Xactimate, Sunbelt. I mean, these are all actual companies that, even if you're someone that left ATI yesterday for $299, I'm telling you, it is an easy investment. And you will literally save for every dollar, whether it's $299 or you're spending $10,000 a year, depending on the size of your business, it pays for itself. And at the end of the day, I am a business person, and everything has to have an ROI, and I would not be pushing it. I would not be where I am at the RA if it didn't have a black and white ROI in terms of joining for membership. So the savings alone, if you get nothing out of it, if you are a recluse and you don't want to come to convention, you don't want to meet vendors, that's totally fine too. There are plenty of those out there. Do it for the savings first and foremost. And if you want to grow your business, if you want to know people in the industry, you want to have relationships with incredible vendors, competitors, et cetera, then definitely consider RIA for the convention, their regional events, and their educational.
Yeah, very, very powerful event. And I would agree with that. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. I'm so grateful for the wisdom that you shared. If any of our listeners would want to reach out, learn a little bit more about you or ATI, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best text, email, call me on my cell phone, 909-322-3476. Call or text me anytime. My information's on social. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook. You can go to our website. But yeah, direct is the best way to get a hold of me. I'm happy to talk to anyone of any size, anywhere in the market, to give you advice. I feel like, again, that's my duty in giving back to the community and my role in RIA. So I'm here to help you.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for joining, Jeff. For our listeners, thanks for listening today, and we'll see you next time on the Building and Branding Podcast.